Here is the very basic question. What is Web API? What is the purpose of Web API? See the diagram. In traditional applications, we have one database and one web application in ASP.NET MVC. In this application, we have both business logic and UI mixed, or you can say UI and logic are tightly coupled. Now, suppose tomorrow you want the same business logic for Android app UI also, okay? Then you have to write the same business logic, basically duplicate the code for Android app also, right? Now to solve this problem of duplication of code, we have web APIs. Here we have one database which will interact with one web API project in .NET C#. Here no HTML or no UI in web API, okay? And the web API can be accessed by iPhone app, Android app, browser based app or Angular or React apps, okay? In short, from all the UI front-end separate application, this web API can be accessed. Here the benefit of web API is you have to manage and update the business logic in C# code at one place only. No duplication of code. In e-commerce application like Amazon, they have one web API. So whether you are ordering through Android mobile app or web browser, the same web API is going to be hit, okay? Now the main purpose, this is the main purpose of web API. Let's summarize the points here. Web API are HTTP based services that can be accessed from the browser as well as mobile apps. Second point is web API enables different software applications to communicate with each other through the internet. So multiple APIs can interact with each other. Okay. The third point is web APIs mostly use JSON and XML formats to transfer the data between different applications. Now you know the basics of web API, right? What are the web API advantages over WCF and web services? Nowadays, you are seeing web APIs are in trend and they are replacing WCF services. Why? The simplest answer is web APIs are easy to consume and they are very fast, okay? If you see this diagram, WCF is good where SOAP protocol is used for exchanging the messages. But nowadays, most UI apps are inclined towards HTTP protocol, okay? And they accept messages in JSON format because it is lightweight. That's why web APIs are getting more popular now. Now let's see some differences in detail. Web APIs are simpler to use and learn and use familiar web technologies like HTTP, JSON and XML. Whereas WCF use SOAP, which is slightly more complex to handle. Second difference and the advantage of web API is web API are more flexible and can be hosted on a wide range of platforms and are compatible with many devices, including mobile devices, web browsers and IoT devices. But WCF services is basically designed for Windows based system only, okay? They can work on mobile devices, but they are primarily focused on Windows based systems. Next difference is web APIs are more scalable and can handle a large number of requests, okay? Scalable means more and more requests they can handle without consuming too many resources. In contrast, WCF services can consume significant resources when handling a large number of requests. So the WCF service requests are quite heavy, okay, in nature. Then web APIs are faster than the WCF services because they use lightweight protocols like JSON and HTTP. Whereas WCF uses SOAP based protocols which are not so faster as compared to JSON and HTTP. Great. Now you know the advantages of web API and thus web services, right? What are HTTP verbs and HTTP methods? First of all, HTTP verbs and HTTP verbs are the same. HTTP methods are the same thing. Now here you can see we have the client on which some UI based front-end application is there, like Angular app or React app. Now these apps will get and post the data in JSON format to the web API server, okay, with the help of these get, post, put and delete methods only, okay. Now let's see the role of these methods, like how they communicate the UI and the server with the help of these HTTP verbs. So first one is get method, which is used basically to obtain the information of a resource. So basically, to get some data, you will use the get method. In the example, order is the resources, and it will get the whole order list from the by executing the get method. Okay. Second is also the another version of get, which is again used to obtain the information of a resource, but this time resource is only one order, okay, which order ID is passed in the URL. Like before, it was the list of orders, but now here with the ID, it is only one order which will be requested. Okay. Third method is post, which will create or insert a new resource. For example, if you are submitting a new order with your details, okay, here the URL will be similar to get method, but in the request body of the method, with the body, the order data will be present. So this is what post is. Then fourth is put method, which will basically update the existing resource of order ID 123 in this example. Like you can update the order quantity or with the help of this put, basically to update. Okay, right. And the last one is delete. This delete method will delete a resource of order of ID 123 in this particular example. So in short, I will say all the CRUD operations can be performed with the help of these four verbs or methods, HTTP methods. Okay. See the URL, the request get, post, put and delete, they can be same, like URL can be same, but based on the request method, like get, post, put, delete, here your API will decide which endpoint or action method of the controller has to be executed. So URL can be same, but might be the method is different. So different action will be performed. Okay, great. Now you know it, right? What is the difference between REST API and Web API? Now, if you see this diagram, then you will say, okay, REST API is another technology like Web API, which also like create APIs, right? It's the wrong answer. REST API is not some another technology like Web API. REST is a set of guidelines which helps in creating a system where applications can easily communicate with each other. So what is REST? It's a set of guidelines or rules you can say. Now, if your Web API will follow all the guidelines and rules of REST, then your Web API can also be called REST API. I hope you got the answer. Here REST stands for Representational State Transfer. Now, I had a hard time in remembering this full form, but yes, this is it. What are REST guidelines? What is the difference between REST and RESTful? This is a theoretical question. If you see this diagram, we have a REST API here, which is getting a request from the client and responding back then, right? Why we are calling this Web API as REST API? Because we have followed some REST guidelines while creating this API, okay? One more thing here, not just Web API, but web services or even WCF services. If they will follow the REST guidelines, then they will also be called RESTful service. Okay. Now let's see what are those guidelines which are like REST guidelines. What are those? The first is separation of client and server. As per the REST guidelines, the implementation of the client and server must be done independently without each knowing about the other. For example, a client UI can be developed in Angular, React or any other front-end technology, okay? But it should not be dependent on the server technology on which Web API is developed. So Web API can be in .NET, Java, C#, Node.js, and client is Angular something. So they are different. Separation of client and server. Okay. Second guideline is stateless. The server will not store anything about the latest HTTP request the client will make. It will treat every request as new request. So if you remember sessions and those server state management techniques where we save the things on the server, that should not be there, like session should not be there. That will make your application stateless. Okay, now no server side state management techniques. Third guideline is uniform interface. Identify the resources by the URL itself. That means by looking at this URL, you can identify what resources this request is looking for. For example, by looking at this URL, I can say, okay, this resources is, we are looking for the list of the questions. Okay, so questions is basically the resources here, basically the data. We call data and resources interchangeably. Okay. Fourth guideline is cacheable. The REST guideline says the API response should be cacheable to improve the performance. Whatever your API will respond, that must be cacheable. Then only it will be like following the REST guideline. And the fifth guideline is layered system. The system should follow layered pattern. For example, MVC is a layered system, okay? Because MVC, we have a model, view, controller, it's a different layers, right? Then because the reason is, then your system is easy to scale. It will accommodate more and more requests in future. So these are the main guidelines. There are, I think, some more guidelines, but these are like enough to know. And if you follow these guidelines in your system, then it is a RESTful service. Your system will be a RESTful service. Okay, there is nothing special about a RESTful service. Now the question was, what is the difference between REST and RESTful? REST we already know. Now the second part, we already know that if any system is following REST guidelines, then it will be called as REST service or RESTful service also, right? Is it possible to use WCF as RESTful service? I think we know the answer. Yes, we can develop RESTful services with WCF by following the REST guidelines in WCF project. How to consume a web API from .NET MVC application? It is a practical question, and the one-line answer is web API methods can be consumed with the help of HTTP client class in .NET. Okay. Now I will quickly show you the steps which are good to know. Okay, it's a practical, like how we will code. So let's take an example. Suppose you want to display the list of Facebook employees in your .NET application, and Facebook has created one API for it, which you have to consume. You want to consume it, right? That API. So this is the code for your .NET application to consume the Facebook API, and you will get the employees list from there. Do not worry, I will break each line of the code and will tell you what this code is doing in simple 7 steps. First step is to create the object of the HTTP client class, which is the most important part. Second step is set the base address property of the client object with the Facebook API URL. Okay, so the API URL you will get, okay, you will get it from the configuration or connection string of your configuration file. The next step is add media type, which is the request format of the data in which you want to receive the data. So basically here we want to receive the employee data from the API, from the Facebook API in JSON format, which is the quite most popular format also. Okay. Then this is the most important step here, getAsync method. This getAsync method will send the request to find the web API resource like get all employees, which is basically the endpoint which is exposed by that API. Okay, get all employees, and then get and store the response in the HTTP response message class object. So second class, this HTTP response message is also very important. After this, we will check whether the API sent a proper response successfully or any error it has sent. Okay, the Facebook API, some error might be occur. Okay, so if successful, then we like if the response is successful, then we will save the result in a variable. And as a last step, we will deserialize the result because we received the data in the JSON format. So we will deserialize the result from the JSON format to the employee object. Okay, because we have employee class in our .NET application. That's why we will deserialize the JSON to the employee object so that our application can understand it. Now yeah, and at last we will return this employee list object to the view like this. So this is the whole story to consume the one API from another API. Okay, nowadays instead of HTTP response message, we have one more way to do this, and that is by using the HTTP client factory. And I hope that I will clear in some another question. But now I hope you know what is HTTP client class methods, how HTTP client class methods are used to consume the web API. Okay. What is the difference between web API and MVC controller? Alright, here you can see the sample controller code of the web API. Okay. See, we have API controller attribute at the top, and the controller is inherited from the controller base class. In some web API, we inherit from web API controller like this also. Basically, it's the same thing. The conclusion is web API controller is inherited from the API controller class, and API controller class is inherited from the controller base class. Whereas if you look at MVC application controller, then here home controller is inherited from the controller class, which is again inherited from the controller base class. So what is the difference? Web API controller derives from API controller class, and ASP.NET MVC controller derives from controller class. Okay. Now web API controller, another difference is does not support give the view support. Web API does not give the view support, whereas ASP.NET MVC gives the view support. These are the two main differences.